Before you decide he stopped caring, listen closely, because this may change the way you see love forever. Some men do not step back because their feelings faded. They step back because what they feel becomes too heavy to carry in silence. That is the part nobody tells you. Sometimes the man who seems the most distant is the one fighting the strongest storm inside. He looks calm on the outside, but inwardly everything is shaking. His silence is not always emptiness. His coldness is not always rejection, and his distance is not always the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of a battle you cannot see. If you have ever looked into someone's eyes and felt something real, only to watch them pull away right after, then stay with me. This is important, because what feels confusing on the surface often has a much deeper truth underneath. There is one silent trait that makes a man retreat, even when his heart is fully involved. One trait that can turn deep love into fear, closeness into distance, and longing into silence. Most people misunderstand it. Most people blame themselves for it. But by the end of this, you may finally understand why some of the deepest love stories are not broken by lack of feeling, but by the fear of feeling too much. And what I'm about to say may explain more than you expected. There is a kind of love that does not arrive gently. It does not simply make a man smile and feel safe. It enters his life like a wave and touches parts of him he thought were buried long ago. Most people believe love naturally brings two people closer, but that is not always how deep connection works. Sometimes the strongest bond creates distance before it creates peace. Sometimes a man becomes emotionally absent, not because his feelings got weaker, but because they grew too intense for him to control. Real love has a strange power. It does not just warm the heart. It reveals the hidden corners of the soul. It brings up fear, insecurity, old pain, and memories he never fully healed from. When a man truly connects with someone, not just physically, not just casually, but at the level of the soul, something inside him wakes up. And once that happens, he is no longer only dealing with romance. He is dealing with himself. That is where the real struggle begins. Stay with this, because the next part matters. Many men have spent most of their lives learning how to stay strong, not how to stay open. They learned how to survive pressure, hide weakness, and move forward without explaining what they feel. So when a real emotional connection appears, it can shake everything they built inside. What looks like distance from the outside may actually be emotional overload on the inside. A lot of men were taught early that feelings should be controlled, that vulnerability is risky, and that needing someone too much makes them weak. So when love enters their life in a deep and undeniable way, it does not only bring joy, it also breaks open every wall they used to protect themselves. That is why a woman may think he pulled away because he lost interest, when the truth is often much harder than that. He pulled away because being close made him feel too much. And the one trait behind this reaction is emotional intensity. Not beauty, not the relationship title, not even what was said between them. It is the sheer intensity of what he feels when he is around her. That is what shakes him. A man who loves deeply is not always afraid of losing the woman. Sometimes he is more afraid of losing control of himself. There are people who make you feel comfortable, calm, and predictable. Then there are those rare people who reach places inside you that no one else has touched. Their presence stirs old wounds, deep longing, and a level of emotional exposure that feels almost unbearable. And for a man who never learned how to process that kind of depth, the natural reaction is often retreat. He starts overthinking everything. Every text matters too much. Every silence feels dangerous. Every possible rejection feels like a collapse. So instead of moving closer, he backs away and tells himself he needs space when really he is trying to survive the strength of what he feels. This is why many women misread male distance as indifference. A man who feels very little can stay relaxed. He can flirt easily. He can talk smoothly. He can keep things light because nothing inside him is truly at risk. But a man who really loves, who feels a genuine emotional bond, becomes exposed in ways that frighten him. He suddenly cares too much. He notices too much. He remembers too much. And that level of attachment can terrify someone who spent years hiding behind emotional control. That is why some men seem colder after falling deeply in love. Not because the warmth disappeared, but because the warmth became too powerful. They begin watching every word they say. They worry about saying too much. They fear showing need. They fear looking weak. They fear being hurt. And slowly, often without meaning to, they create distance as a form of self-protection. There is a painful truth inside this. The more deeply he loves, the more vulnerable he becomes to pain. And vulnerability is something many men were never taught to carry well. People praise men for being calm, logical, unshaken, but no one teaches them what to do when someone enters their life and suddenly becomes emotionally sacred to them. No one teaches them how to hold love that keeps them awake at night. No one teaches them how to manage the fear of losing someone whose presence has started to feel like home. So they choose silence, they choose distance, they choose withdrawal. Not because distance feels good, but because exposure feels worse. Sometimes a man disappears for a few days, not because you no longer matter, but because he is trying to regain control over emotions that feel too strong inside him. He sits alone and replays every conversation. He wonders why your absence affects him so deeply. He questions why your voice can calm him and unsettle him at the same time. The deeper the connection feels, the more frightened he becomes by how much power it seems to have over him. This is why intense love often brings confusion before clarity. The soul recognizes the connection quickly, but the ego panics because it senses change. Big change. Love at that level does not just add someone to your life, it changes your inner world. And many men are not prepared for that. Some carry old scars from betrayal, abandonment, humiliation, or emotional neglect. Those wounds do not vanish just because love shows up. In fact, real love often wakes them up. When someone truly matters, every old fear becomes louder. The fear of rejection grows sharper. The fear of not being enough becomes harder to ignore. The fear of being emotionally destroyed becomes almost unbearable. So instead of stepping closer and risking full exposure, many men unconsciously create space. They say they need time. They say they are confused. They act like they need to think. But deep down, what they are really trying to escape is the intensity of their own attachment. And if you have ever felt confused by that, keep listening, because this is where everything starts to make sense. Human beings often run from the very thing they want most. That is one of the strangest truths of the heart. A man can look emotionally unavailable while thinking about the same woman every single night. He can appear distant while carrying an attachment so deep it shapes his whole inner life. He can act cold while privately feeling warmth, longing, regret, and fear all at once. This contradiction destroys many connections because outward behavior does not always match inner truth. And what hurts the most is that some men honestly believe their distance is a form of protection. They think they are shielding the woman from their confusion, their unresolved pain, their unstable emotions, or their fear of failure. They do not want to become harmful. They do not want to disappoint her. They do not want to reveal how lost they feel inside. So they step back and hope silence will somehow make everything easier. But buried emotions do not disappear. They grow heavier in the dark. They become pressure. They become restlessness. They become regret. There is something deeply sad about being loved by someone who cannot fully express it. Their eyes reveal what their mouth refuses to say. Their silence holds storms. Their distance hides attachment. Sometimes they look at you like they found peace in your presence, and then, just as quickly, they retreat into isolation. If you do not understand what is happening, it feels cruel. But often, it is not cruelty. Often, it is emotional survival from someone who never learned a healthier way to cope. And this is where so many relationships quietly break apart. Not because the love disappeared, but because fear became stronger than communication. Two people can care deeply for each other and still completely misunderstand what the other is doing. One sees silence and feels rejected. The other uses silence because he is overwhelmed. One wants reassurance. The other hides emotion out of fear. One moves closer. The other pulls away. And little by little, the bond gets buried under pride, anxiety, trauma, shame, and unspoken truth. That is why emotional maturity matters more than passion alone. Passion can create fire, but maturity is what keeps two people from burning down what they both want to protect. A man with intense emotions often loves in a way that is never shallow. When he cares fully. He notices everything. He feels everything. He carries your words with him long after the conversation ends. But because his feelings run deep, he also fears loss more strongly than most people around him can see. He may look distant, but inside he is deeply connected. He may avoid vulnerability in public while craving closeness in private every day. The issue is not lack of feeling. The issue is that he does not know how to regulate the size of what he feels without becoming flooded by it. So instead of saying, "This matters to me more than I know how to handle," he becomes quiet. Instead of saying, "I care so much it scares me," he steps back. And if that has ever happened to you, you know how painful that silence can be. A man who loves deeply often studies the woman he loves in silence. He notices small shifts in her mood. He remembers tiny details she forgot she ever shared. He carries her presence into ordinary moments without saying a word to anyone. A song reminds him of her. A quiet drive reminds him of her. A late night reminds him of her. Even success can feel incomplete because part of him wants to share it with her. His silence is not empty. It is crowded, full of thoughts, full of memories, full of things he never says. But because emotional intensity frightens him, he hides all of that behind distance. He fears that if he admits how attached he has become, he will lose the last bit of control he thinks he has. And maybe that is one of the deepest truths here. Real love changes a person psychologically. It is not only romance, it is transformation. It brings hidden wounds to the surface. It exposes insecurities we spent years denying. It challenges the illusion that we do not need anyone. Many people are ready for attraction, excitement, and fantasy. Very few are ready for the emotional consequences of truly loving someone. They expect butterflies. They do not expect fear. They expect warmth. They do not expect identity shock. They expect connection. They do not expect that real closeness may force them to meet the parts of themselves they have been avoiding for years. That is why the strongest-looking people can become emotionally fragile in the presence of the right person. Many men never learned how to say, "I am overwhelmed." They never learned how to say, "You matter too much to me and I do not know what to do with that." So instead of speaking honestly, they change their behavior. They go quiet. They become inconsistent. They seem present one day and miles away the next. If you have ever loved someone like that, then you know how deeply confusing it feels. One moment the connection feels real, alive, almost sacred. The next moment, it feels like they vanished emotionally without explanation. Their energy says one thing, but their actions say something else. And that kind of mixed signal can break the heart in slow motion. But people are complicated. Trauma affects expression, fear distorts behavior, shame creates masks, insecurity creates distance. Some people chase love aggressively because they fear losing it. Others retreat from love instinctively because they fear needing it. Both reactions come from fear, and fear is powerful. Fear can convince a man that distance is safety. Fear can make him believe that emotional detachment will protect him from heartbreak. Fear can lock words in his chest that are begging to be spoken. But fear also creates loneliness, because the soul was never made to stay disconnected from real intimacy for too long. Deep down, every human being wants to be understood without being judged, seen without being punished, and loved without needing to hide behind a performance. That need never disappears. It only gets buried. There are nights when a man who loves deeply sits alone with thoughts he cannot explain to anyone. He remembers her laugh. He remembers the way her presence changed the feeling of a room. He replays old moments and wonders if he should reach out or stay silent. His pride tells him to remain distant. His heart tells him to come back. And inside that invisible war, he suffers more than people realize. Because suppressing emotion does not erase it, it traps it. It turns love into tension, tension into anxiety, anxiety into exhaustion. Many emotionally distant men are not emotionally empty. They are emotionally overloaded. That difference matters. An empty person feels little. An overloaded person feels too much and has no healthy system for processing it. So he disappears, not because the love died, but because the love woke up fears he never healed. This is why emotional awareness matters so much. Without self-honesty, love becomes chaos. Without communication, relationships become guesswork. Without healing, old pain gets projected onto new people. A man who has not faced his inner fears may sabotage the very relationship he wants most, not because he enjoys hurting anyone, but because his mind is trying to protect him from imagined future pain. He may think he is avoiding disaster while actually creating it. And this pattern continues until he becomes brave enough to understand that love is not the threat. Unhealed fear is the threat. That is the real enemy. And until that truth is faced, distance keeps repeating. Still, there is something beautiful hidden inside emotionally intense love. It proves the soul is awake. It proves connection still has the power to move a person beyond logic. In a world where many interactions feel shallow, transactional, and numb, deep love remains sacred, complicated, yes, painful often, but sacred. Because when someone touches your inner life strongly enough to awaken both love and fear at once, it means the connection reached beyond the surface. The danger is when that process gets misunderstood. Some women spend years blaming themselves for a man's distance. They wonder if they were not attractive enough, gentle enough, patient enough, lovable enough. But often, his withdrawal has less to do with her value and more to do with his inability to manage what her presence awakened inside him. Sometimes she simply reached emotional depths he was not prepared to face. And instead of learning how to carry that intensity with maturity, he ran from it. That does not mean distance should always be excused. Love still needs communication, effort, honesty, and emotional presence. Pain does not justify hurting someone. Confusion does not excuse disappearing without care, but understanding the psychology behind withdrawal creates compassion where there was once only self-blame. Not every distant person is cold-hearted. Some are just wounded, flooded, and unequipped. Some are carrying years of emotional training that taught them how to perform strength, but never how to reveal tenderness. And when real connection collides with all of that hidden conditioning, the result often looks like distance, even when the feeling underneath is very real. There is a quiet loneliness inside many men that almost nobody talks about. A loneliness built from years of emotional suppression. Many were taught to achieve, provide, compete, and endure, but not to express emotional vulnerability without shame. So when deep love enters their life, it crashes into years of conditioning. Part of them wants to surrender to the connection completely. Another part fights hard to stay in control. That inner split creates the distance that confuses so many relationships. You may notice that men who love deeply sometimes keep watching from afar. They stay emotionally connected even after separation. They quietly check if you are okay. They think about reaching out more often than you know. Because real emotional bonds do not disappear easily. The mind may try to suppress, but the soul remembers. Genuine connection leaves marks. It leaves emotional fingerprints that remain long after physical distance begins. But there is a hard truth hidden here too. Love alone is not enough if fear is running the relationship. Emotional depth without emotional courage turns into self-sabotage. At some point, a man has to decide whether he will keep hiding behind fear or become the kind of person who can handle closeness without running from it. Because love cannot live forever inside silence. Sooner or later, truth has to be spoken. Sooner or later, vulnerability has to be accepted. Sooner or later, emotional walls have to come down. If not, even the deepest bond starts to suffocate under the weight of everything that remains unsaid. And if this is hitting close to home, stay with me, because the final truth may be the most important part of all. Maybe you have spent nights wondering why someone who clearly cared about you suddenly became distant. Maybe their eyes felt full of love while their actions left you confused. Maybe their silence hurt more than rejection would have. But remember this carefully. People reveal their level of healing by the way they handle love. Some communicate, some panic, some stay, some disappear. Every response tells a story about what is happening inside them. A healed man does not see emotional closeness as danger. He understands that vulnerability is not weakness, it is courage. He speaks instead of withdrawing. He stays present instead of hiding behind silence. But a wounded man often experiences deep feeling as a threat. The more he feels, the more exposed he becomes, and the more he wants to retreat. Until he faces that pattern directly, he may keep repeating the same cycle with every person he loves. Life has a strange way of bringing us face to face with connections that expose our deepest truths. Some people enter our lives not only to love us, but to wake us up, to reveal what still lives in fear, to force growth where avoidance once ruled. And while that process can hurt, it is also sacred because real emotional growth begins at the exact point where emotional avoidance stops working. Many people are starving for deep connection while also being terrified of it. They want intimacy but fear vulnerability. They want love but fear abandonment. They want to be understood but hide their real feelings. That contradiction creates so much human pain. We build walls to feel safe, only to discover the walls become a prison. If a man truly loves you deeply, his distance is rarely simple. Under it, there may be longing, fear, confusion, shame, old wounds, emotional overwhelm, and battles you will never fully see. That does not mean you should chase endlessly or lose yourself trying to rescue someone who refuses to communicate. You should not. But it does mean human behavior is often more complex than it appears. Sometimes the coldest silence hides the warmest attachment. Sometimes the greatest distance hides the strongest pull. We all carry invisible history inside us: childhood pain, old heartbreak, betrayal, rejection, insecurity. And when real love arrives, it touches all of those hidden places at once. Some people rise into courage, others retreat into fear. Either way, love reveals who we really are beneath the image we show the world. One day, a man who spent years running from emotional intensity may finally understand that love was never the enemy. Vulnerability was never weakness. Feeling deeply was never something to be ashamed of. And when that realization comes, he may look back and see how much pain his silence created. Because emotional avoidance protects no one in the end. It only delays healing. The soul does not want a shallow bond. It wants truth. It wants emotional presence. It wants the courage to be fully seen without hiding. And the people who truly transform our lives are rarely the ones who only entertained us for a moment. They are the ones who awakened the deepest parts of us, the ones who forced us to face ourselves, the ones who showed us how much feeling the human heart can actually hold. So if someone once loved you deeply but kept their distance, do not rush to believe you were unworthy. Sometimes you were simply too emotionally important for a wounded heart to handle well. Sometimes your presence awakened feelings they spent years trying not to feel. Sometimes the bond became so intense that distance looked easier than honesty. But never forget this. Love reaches its highest form not when two wounded people endlessly trigger each other and call it fate, but when both people choose growth over avoidance. Real love asks for courage. The courage to speak honestly. The courage to stay emotionally present. The courage to stop running when fear tells you to hide. The courage to remain when vulnerability feels risky. Because in the end, the real tragedy is not loving deeply. The real tragedy is letting fear silence a love that could have changed your life. Right now, somewhere, there are people separated not by the absence of love, but by the inability to express it. Hearts full of feeling, mouths full of silence, souls carrying oceans behind closed doors. Maybe that is why this message reached you, because some part of you needed this truth. A man who loves deeply may keep his distance because the intensity of that love awakens both longing and fear inside him at the same time. And only those who are brave enough to face their own heart will learn that the deepest connections are not meant to be escaped. They are meant to be understood, healed, and finally lived. If this spoke to something you have been carrying, do not scroll away too fast. Sit with it. Let it sink in. Sometimes the answer you were searching for was hidden inside the silence all along.